Hey guys, welcome to the video. What does MVP stand for in the startup world? MVP is short for minimum viable product, and this is basically a philosophy, a strategy of software development in the startup world where you want to put out a piece of software as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, so that you can get it into the hands of the end users. And then with that feedback from the end users, you'll start to figure out and flesh out the real world use case for your software and your business. MVP is just a rebranding of an old business strategy I learned decades ago, where I've been teaching people for years about this. You never know what product is going to work. You never know what service is going to work. You can do all your market analysis and all your assessments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, nobody really knows what's going to work until you get it into the marketplace. So it's very common for businesses to have to pivot their business model quite a bit until they actually figure out what it is their product or service is going to actually look like in the end. You've seen it over and over again. You read about Google. They had no idea how they were going to market it. They had no idea initially if it was going to be, how they were going to make money with the search engine. All they knew is they needed a search engine that actually worked. Back in the days before Google, all the search engines were terrible. You search for anything and you would get pornography. Search for bananas, you get pornography. Melons, you get pornography. You search for cars, you get pornography. So when Google came out with their innovation, which was very simple, voting system, via hyperlinks, it changed the way search worked. Now, they had that idea, but they had no idea how to monetize that, and they had to figure it out, and they tried different strategies until they finally got to what they have today, which is the AdWords model, which is basically, it's not really that much of an innovation in terms of the money making. All they're doing is all they did was take all the classified ads business from newspapers, which are all folded, and magazines, and they just took it all for themselves. That's all that Google did in the end. Not a criticism, but it was just a repurposing, if you will, of an old idea. Anyway, back to MVP. MVP is a valuable method of deployment because you never know, as I said, when you're first starting out a business, if the product is going to work or not. Even Apple famously had many failures. They would launch a product, even with all their power and their great brand and goodwill. Certain things never worked. The original, I think it was called Merlin, never worked. They had, I think it was Apple II Lisa, never worked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they've had, even Apple, the biggest and most successful consumer product company in the world, in the history of the world, they've even had failures. Anyhow, so MVP is just a rebranding of an old strategy that you want to get your product out as quickly as possible. In my own experience, when I first started business a long time ago, I had a product business. It was water purification resins and carbons and zeolites. And so I remember when we launched our first product line, we had an expectation that product A would be the big seller. And as a result, and of course, it was product C that was the big seller. This happens all the time. So to summarize, MVP is minimum viable product, which means get the product out with the minimum level so that it's just barely functional, but representative of what it could be. This way you can get the product into the hands of the end users, and then you'll be able to more accurately assess whether or not the product is viable, what changes you might have to make, etc. So with my own experience with Studio Web, which is my online learning platform, we got our first schools in around 2011. So we developed a prototype mid-2010, something like that. Got our first schools in 2011. And from there, when we've had actual students in classrooms using Studio Web, teachers actually using Studio Web, deploying the app within the school environment, we learned a lot. We had to change so many things about the applications, and down to how the system functioned, what functionality we provided for teachers, how even the quizzing and the code challenges went. It was a learning process. So even though I conceived of the idea of the application And I got maybe 60% of it right, something like that. I was fortunate that I had a deep background in software at that point. Nonetheless, there's still a lot. There was that other 40%, if you will, that still had to be developed into the product based on user experience. So MVP is not just an acronym for something. It's actually a strategy. It's strategy to get the product out as quickly as possible. So whether you're in the software business, the coffee business, you're selling couches or lights, doesn't matter. You want to get that product out into the market as quickly as possible to gauge user reaction. All right, I hope that's useful. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.